The motorcade moves through Beijing, flanked by Chinese security, American flags fluttering against the gray morning sky of one of the most surveilled cities on Earth. Inside that motorcade, the President of the United States, heading toward the Great Hall of the People, the same ornate building that sits on the edge of Tiananmen Square, and waiting for him on those steps, not just Xi Jinping, the CEOs of Apple, Goldman Sachs, Nvidia, Boeing, Blackstone, GE Aerospace, Visa, Citigroup, SpaceX, and Tesla. American capitalism, standing at the front door of the Chinese Communist Party. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw anything like that? This is Beijing, May 14th, 2026. And for the first time in 9 years, a sitting American president has touched down in China. Not for a photo op, not for a sidebar. For a full 2-day summit, bilateral talks, a state banquet, a visit to the Temple of Heaven, and conversations that will shape what the next decade looks like for every country on this planet. The man across the table from Donald Trump is Xi Jinping, the most powerful figure in China since Mao Zedong, a leader who has spent the last several years watching Washington impose tariffs, blacklist Chinese tech firms, and quietly arm Taiwan. The topics on the agenda are not small ones. Trade, Taiwan, the ongoing U.S. military conflict with Iran, and artificial intelligence. Who controls it, who sells it, and who gets left behind. Trump told reporters before he boarded for China that these talks, more than anything else, would be about trade, but his aides, quietly, have already confirmed something the White House is not advertising. There is no comprehensive deal on the table, so why is he there? If you want clear, fact-based coverage of this summit as it develops, subscribe now, because this story is moving extremely quickly. Let's go back to the beginning of this. Trump arrived at Beijing Capital International Airport on the morning of May 13th. His delegation, one of the most powerful ever assembled for a foreign trip, included Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. 3 of the most consequential figures in American foreign and economic policy, all in the same city at the same time at the invitation of the Chinese government. That alone tells you something about the weight this administration is placing on these 2 days. Trump's motorcade moved toward the Great Hall of the People. Xi Jinping arrived on foot, walking down the hall's front steps. Trump stepped out of his vehicle moments later. The 2 men met at the bottom of those steps, a choreographed moment of ceremony that Beijing knows how to stage better than almost anyone. Xi then shook hands with the members of the American delegation. Then Trump shook hands with members of the Chinese side. On those steps, waiting, watching, representing not governments but balance sheets, were the chief executives of Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Nvidia, Blackstone, GE Aerospace, Boeing, and Visa. Trump had said before the trip that he planned to ask Xi directly to open up China for American companies. Some of those firms already operate in China, but in carefully limited ways, constrained by Beijing's rules about foreign market access, data control, and strategic industries. This was not a business conference with a political backdrop. This was the other way around, a geopolitical summit with a corporate lobby embedded inside it. After the welcoming ceremony, the 2 leaders moved into their first bilateral session. Later in the day, the schedule called for a visit to the Temple of Heaven, a site that carries layers of historical symbolism in Beijing's cultural landscape, and in the evening, a state banquet. The kind of lavish diplomatic theater that both governments use to signal warmth, even when the underlying relationship is anything but warm. Here is what's confirmed about the agenda going into those talks. The 2 sides are expected to discuss a formal U.S. China trade board, along with potential agreements in aerospace, agriculture, and energy. Those are significant areas. Agricultural exports matter deeply to American farming communities. Aerospace touches both Boeing's business interests and the question of which nation builds the planes that carry the world. Energy cuts straight to the global price of oil, gas, and the future of clean power. But, and this matters, aides on both sides have been careful to manage expectations. No comprehensive deal. That phrase has been used deliberately. Whatever emerges from these 2 days, it will not be the kind of sweeping trade agreement that reshapes everything overnight. What it could be is a framework, a signal, a temperature reading of where the 2 biggest economies on Earth actually stand after years of trade war, tech sanctions, and deepening strategic rivalry. One Harvard professor who studies U.S.-Asia relations told NBC News that this summit would provide the baseline for several really important conversations about the U.S.-China relationship in the years and decades to come. He specifically highlighted trade, Taiwan, and artificial intelligence as the three conversations that will define that baseline. And then there is the fourth issue, the one nobody on either side wants to make the headline, but which hangs over everything: Iran. The United States is in an active military conflict with Iran. That war, still developing, still grinding, puts pressure on China in ways that Beijing has not publicly articulated. China has its own energy interests, diplomatic relationships, and strategic calculations tied to Tehran. How much Trump pushes Xi on Iran behind closed doors, and how much Xi pushes back, is something neither government will fully disclose. Which means a significant part of what happened in that room today is something the public will never be told. More than a dozen American CEOs made this trip to Beijing. The White House confirmed the list includes Tim Cook of Apple, Elon Musk of SpaceX and Tesla, and Jensen Huang of Nvidia, the company at the center of the global AI chip war. The same Nvidia whose chips Beijing has been trying to acquire despite U.S. export controls. Think about that for a moment. Here is what does not get said often enough about U.S.-China summits. The outcomes are never just diplomatic. They land on kitchen tables. Every tariff that stays in place or gets lifted changes what Americans pay for electronics, clothes, and appliances. Every agricultural deal, or failure to reach one, determines what American soybean and corn farmers get paid this season. Every technology agreement shapes which companies hire, which ones die, and where the next generation of jobs actually sits. This summit is happening against the backdrop of a trade truce, not a trade peace. The tariffs that defined the early phase of Trump's second term did not simply vanish. They were paused, managed, partially rolled back. The relationship between Washington and Beijing on trade is less a resolved dispute and more a controlled flame, one that could flare up again depending on what happens in these rooms. The presence of Jensen Huang at Beijing Capital International Airport, meeting Trump on the tarmac in Alaska before the second leg of the flight, is one of the most telling details of this entire trip. Nvidia is not just a chip company, it is the infrastructure layer of the artificial intelligence revolution. The U.S. government has spent years trying to limit China's access to Nvidia's most advanced AI chips through export controls. And here is Nvidia's CEO flying to Beijing with the American president. That is either a sign that something is changing or a carefully managed piece of theater designed to suggest it. The Taiwan question is perhaps the most dangerous undercurrent of the entire summit. Xi has never abandoned Beijing's official position that Taiwan is part of China and that reunification, by whatever means necessary, is a matter of national destiny. The U.S. has officially maintained strategic ambiguity on Taiwan for decades, supplying arms while not formally committing to military defense. Every conversation between an American president and Xi carries this buried fault line. Harvard's Professor Mitter told NBC News that Taiwan will come up, but that no immediate resolution is likely. The word resolution is doing enormous work in that sentence, because the alternative to resolution is continued ambiguity, and ambiguity on Taiwan is what has kept the region stable for 50 years. But it is also the thing that could shatter it. Do you think this summit actually moves the needle on the trade war, or is it more ceremony than substance? Let me know in the comments. This audience always has sharp takes on these things. Iran, meanwhile, is the wild card. The U.S. is militarily engaged with a country that China has economic and strategic ties to. Beijing has not broken with Tehran, but Beijing also does not want the Middle East to spiral into a broader conflict that disrupts the energy markets and shipping lanes that fuel the Chinese economy. What Trump asks Xi to do about Iran, and whether Xi gives him anything, is a conversation happening entirely off the record. The expert consensus is that this summit matters more for what it signals than for any specific deal it produces. But signals in international relations are not nothing. They determine whether allies feel reassured or nervous. They shape what financial markets price in. They tell Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Australia something about how Washington is positioning itself. And they tell the American public something too, about whether the leader they elected is managing the country's most complicated foreign relationship or simply performing it. Here's the detail most people are going to skip past. Trump and Xi could meet as many as 4 times this year. 4 times. This Beijing summit is just the first. Xi is expected to visit the United States later in 2026. Both could appear at the G20 in December. Trump may also travel to Shenzhen in November for APEC. That is an extraordinary diplomatic cadence for two countries that are, by almost every structural measure, in a period of deep strategic rivalry. When rivals start meeting that often, it usually means one of two things. They are genuinely trying to stabilize something, or one side is buying time. The question is which side. Somewhere in Iowa right now, a soybean farmer is watching the news. He is not tracking diplomatic protocols or reading about the symbolism of the Great Hall of the People. He is watching a number, the price his crop will fetch. And he knows that number moves based on what two men decide in a room 12 time zones away. This is the reality of what a U.S. China summit actually is, stripped of the ceremony. It is a negotiation that reaches into the daily lives of people who will never be in the same room as either leader, never shake either man's hand, never fully understand what was agreed to or left unsaid. American farmers have watched the trade war years tear through their markets. China was once the largest buyer of American agricultural products, soybeans especially. When the tariffs hit, Beijing retaliated by redirecting purchases to Brazil and Argentina. Whole counties in the Midwest felt it. The damage did not heal cleanly. Some of those trade relationships never fully came back. The potential for agricultural agreements in this summit matters to those communities in a very direct way, not as geopolitics, as survival math. For workers in the American manufacturing sector, the story is different but equally immediate. When Chinese goods flood the U.S. market at lower prices, factories close. When U.S. firms get better access to Chinese consumers, they expand. The swings are not theoretical. They are plant closures and new production lines and hiring freezes and overtime shifts. Families in technology corridors, Silicon Valley, Austin, Seattle, the Research Triangle, live inside a different version of this story. The U.S. government's export controls on advanced AI chips to China were, for a period, the single most consequential technology policy decision in the world. They determined which AI systems China could build, how fast, with what capabilities. Jensen Huang showing up in Beijing with the American president is a direct reference to that reality. The chip war is not just corporate competition. It determines who builds the AI systems that will eventually run hospitals, militaries, financial systems, and communications infrastructure across the entire planet. For ordinary Chinese citizens, the stakes are framed differently. Xi's government has tied national prestige to technological self-sufficiency, building Chinese alternatives to American chips, American software, American platforms. Every time that project gets closer to success, Beijing's negotiating position gets stronger. Every time it falls short, Xi needs something from Washington more than Washington needs something from him. The atmosphere in Beijing itself, as the motorcade moved through the city, was one of careful, managed display. China's government does not leave symbolic moments to chance. The Great Hall of the People was chosen deliberately. The steps, the ceremony, the order in which hands were shaken. These are not accidents. They are communications, directed both at the world and at the Chinese people. Outside those walls, Beijing's streets operated as they always do. Dense, fast, the everyday machinery of a city of more than 20 million people. But in government districts, in the corridors of the foreign ministry, in the offices of state-owned enterprises with direct stakes in what gets negotiated, there is a specific kind of stillness that descends around moments like this. People wait to learn what shape the next chapter of their country's foreign relationships will take. And in Washington, the political math around this summit is its own kind of pressure. Trump campaigned on confronting China. His base expects strength. His business allies, including many of the men standing on those steps in Beijing, expect access. Those two things are not always compatible. A deal that opens Chinese markets for Apple might look like a win in corporate boardrooms and a capitulation in political rallies. Every word that comes out of these meetings will be filtered through that prism. The bilateral talks are just the beginning. Even if this summit produces agreements on agriculture, energy, and aerospace, the pieces that aides have flagged as genuinely possible, the harder issues stay open. Taiwan does not get resolved in 2 days. The AI chip question does not get resolved by one CEO on one tarmac. And the Iran situation, which the Pentagon has reportedly been reconsidering how to even name, does not get easier just because two leaders share a banquet. Watch for what gets signed, what gets announced in vague terms, and what gets quietly dropped. Those three categories will tell you everything. Step back from the ceremony, step back from the motorcades and the state banquets and the handshakes. What is actually happening here? Two countries, the world's largest and second largest economies, that have been locked in a slow-motion decoupling for nearly a decade, are now attempting to manage that decoupling carefully enough that it does not become a catastrophe. Not just for them, but for everyone attached to the global trading system they built together. This summit did not arrive in a vacuum. It follows years of escalating tariffs, chip export controls, TikTok bans, Huawei restrictions, military posturing in the South China Sea, Taiwan arms sales, and a COVID-era breakdown in communication that both governments are still trying to repair. The relationship did not break, but it bent severely in ways that created new structural realities on both sides. The last time Trump stood on those steps at the Great Hall of the People was 2017. In the 9 years since, China has launched its own semiconductor development programs, built the world's largest navy by vessel count, expanded its nuclear arsenal, deepened its partnerships with Russia and Iran, and positioned itself as the primary alternative pole of global power to the United States. The China that Trump walked into this week is not the China he left in 2017. For America's allies in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, this summit will be read very carefully. Any sign that Washington is softening its position on Taiwan will register immediately in Tokyo and Seoul. Any sign that Trump is trading strategic clarity for commercial access will raise questions in capitals that have spent the last several years aligning more closely with Washington precisely because they were betting on American resolve. The European dimension matters too. European governments have been watching the U.S. China trade dynamic with deep anxiety. If Washington cuts bilateral deals with Beijing that reshape technology and agricultural flows, it will affect European industries, European farmers, and European tech firms trying to compete in the same markets. Intelligence agencies on multiple continents are paying close attention to something specific: the AI conversation. Not because of what will be officially announced, but because of what gets said informally. Whether any softening of chip export restrictions gets discussed, whether Beijing offers anything on data sharing, semiconductor manufacturing, or rare earth access in exchange for technology market concessions from Washington. Those conversations, if they happen, will not appear in any press release. What makes this moment genuinely consequential is not the pageantry. It is the fact that the next phase of U.S. China relations, whatever form it takes, gets its opening terms set here. Mitter's word baseline is exactly right. Summits like this do not resolve disputes. They establish what both sides are willing to pretend is stable long enough to keep the larger machinery from breaking down. Whether Trump and Xi actually achieve even that limited goal, or whether these 2 days produce ceremony without substance, is something that will become clear not in today's press conference, but in the weeks of trade data, technology export decisions, and military posture adjustments that follow. The motorcade is inside the walls of the Great Hall now. Whatever happens next, it happens without cameras. This summit is still developing. The bilateral talks, the state banquet, and whatever gets announced, or quietly buried, in the coming hours will tell us whether this was the beginning of a new chapter between Washington and Beijing, or a very expensive photo opportunity. What do you think? Is Trump walking away from Beijing with something real, or is Xi playing a longer game? Drop your read in the comments. I want to know what this audience thinks. And subscribe now, because the follow-up to this story is going to be just as significant as the summit itself, when the details of what was actually agreed start leaking. And they will. You want to be here when it happens.